Bitch, I'm so gone, and it's been so long. But it's all good, my pretty bitches in the leopard thong. Kick back, turn out the lights and write a song. Get that Viking in my system, feel the bullshit, ease off.
What's up, slackers? Today we're going to be talking about Of Mice and Men, Chapter 1. The chapter starts off setting the scene. The book starts out next to a river. Next to the river there's a sycamore tree. Next we're brought to this scene where two men are walking single-filed one behind the other. The man leading the pack is described as short, small, and quick, with defined features. The man trailing behind him is described as huge, shapeless, he's dragging his feet, kind of sluggish. It says that his face isn't really defined, it's sort of just a shape. It refers to him as being a bear. In fact, throughout the chapter, it refers to him being animal-like or performing like an animal 5 times. As they're walking, the short man abruptly stops. The man trailing behind him has a delayed reaction and almost hits him. The short guy says, "We're going to stop here and rest." The big guy jumps into the river and starts snouting up the water. The small guy is a little more cautious and looks around for danger. We then learn their names. The big guy's name is Lennie because the short guy yells at him for jumping in the river and drinking water. The small guy's name is George. After looking around for a little bit, George decides to get a drink of water too, even though he questions the water. The small guy starts ranting about how the bus driver dropped them off 4 miles from their destination. Lennie asks George where they're going. George complains that Lennie already forgot. It seems like George has told Lennie many times because George complains about Lennie forgetting. Lennie apologizes and says all he can remember is something about rabbits. The rabbits tie in later in the chapter. George reminds Lennie that they got work cards and a bus ticket. Lennie starts looking through his pockets to find his bus ticket, but he can't find it anywhere. George tells Lennie he's never had it because he'd never trust Lennie with such a thing. At this point, Lennie pulls something out of his pocket, and George asks what it was. George discovers that Lennie had a dead mouse in his hand. George immediately takes the mouse from Lennie and tosses it across the river. Lennie says he only wanted it just to pet it. Lennie also comments that he found it that way. George reveals his master plan. George reminds Lennie that they're going to work on a ranch, like the one they used to work at. He reminds Lennie that his part of the master plan is to say nothing, just stand there. Lennie struggles to repeat that simple part of what he was supposed to do. George asks Lennie if he's going to do anything bad at this ranch like he did in their last ranch. He then learned that George and Lennie used to work at a ranch in Weeds, California. They're coming down to Soledad, California to work on a new ranch. George asks Lennie if he's going to get them in trouble again, like he did in Weeds, California. Lennie can't even remember what he did. George reminds him that they had to run away and escape from the ranch. Lennie changes the subject and asks why they don't go to the new ranch to get supper. George says he just likes it right there. He mentions that he wants them to see Lennie work before they hear him speak. It's obvious that he doesn't want to run the risk of having Lennie say something stupid at the new ranch before they start working. George then tells Lennie to go off and get some firewood. And while Lennie's off getting firewood, George hears a splash in the water. Lennie comes back with something in his hand. George automatically knows that Lennie has caught and killed a mouse. Lennie mentions that he found it that way and that he only wanted to pet it. This guy really likes mice. George immediately takes away his mouse and tosses it across the river. At which point, Lennie starts to whimper and starts to get teary-eyed. George feels sorry for Lennie and promises that the next one he catches he can keep for a little bit. It's pretty clear at this point that Lennie's pretty slow. They decide to cook up some beans. During the whole process, Lennie keeps complaining that he wants ketchup with his beans. George gets super pissed off at Lennie and starts to complain about having to take care of him. He talks about how he could have a woman and spend his paycheck on other stuff rather than taking care of Lennie. He then starts complaining about how they got ran out of their last ranch. At their last ranch, Lennie saw a woman with a soft dress. He wanted to pet it, so he went up to touch her dress. Naturally, the woman freaks out, and Lennie's reaction is to grab hold of her dress. They were then hunted down, and George and Lennie had to escape their ranch. Lennie, sensing that George is pissed off, asks George if he wants him to leave for good. He says he can go to the mountains, or hide off, or just disappear altogether. George starts to feel sorry about scolding Lennie. He then apologizes. Lennie tells George that even if they had ketchup right in front of them, he wouldn't take any of it. He says that he'd give it all to George. At the end of this chapter, Lennie asks George to tell him about the rabbits again. George starts on this speech that it seems like he constantly is repeating to Lennie. He talks about how most guys like them are the loneliest guys in the world, but how they're different. They have each other. Someday he says that they're going to have a ranch. He talks about how they're going to have a bunch of animals and a bunch of land. It's obvious that George is always telling him this because Lennie keeps interrupting him and saying the parts George is supposed to say. Lennie asks how he's going to take care of the rabbit patch. George is sort of controlling Lennie with this story about how he's going to be able to take care of rabbits. Anytime Lennie does something dumb, George is going to threaten to take away his rabbit patch. To end, George asks Lennie what he's supposed to do the next day. Lennie struggles but remembers that he's supposed to say nothing, just stand there. George mentions to Lennie, which this seems somewhat important, that if he gets into trouble, to come back to this exact same spot and hide in the brush. This is obviously a foreshadow for later in the book, when probably something happens. To check into Chapter 2, the link's down below. If you have any questions from your homework, please leave a comment below, and I'll answer it as soon as I can. Please like and subscribe so I can make more videos. Thanks. Have a great day. Please deep throat and subscribe. Lennie got them in trouble because he saw a girl wearing a soft dress.